installment today. So welcome everyone.
Thank you.
If you could ask everyone to mute themselves, that would be great. Thank you. Except for Tarchin and Geshe Jamphel.
All right.
And Kerry, if you want me to screen share, I think I need to be co-host. Thank you.
Did you use Geshe? Here it is again. Here it is. Oops. Oh, yeah. Lasso.
Yeah.
Okay. What should we go away? We start with refuge of Buddha. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my means of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my means of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my means of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all transmigratory beings. Is that it? Okay. Geshe disappeared. All right. The auspicious start. Can you hear me, people? Yeah? Okay, cool. This was a short session, kind of. I mean, limitless benefits from taking refuge. You know?
Perhaps
I just couldn't get the link.
Perhaps I could just mention while we've got a pause then that I am putting these videos onto our YouTube channel, which is Jamyang Leads TV. We've got the first session there. We didn't record last week because there was some confusion, but this week we are recording again. So.
Good evening. Yeah. Thank you. Oh yeah, that has been Kasang that has a Kawali Hakosan.
Hakumason, Yabo Hakumason, Chichina Shokang Chupshi. By the way.
Oh, dang it. Better than the dream, Sidra. Tamcha. Ah, that's right. Tanganza Dikapsu, Tatsu Kare Selade, Nanze Hakwa del Chidajan, Atisha lamrim di, Tini Dudushibres. Inayang, that the Gavu Pasatan, lamrim Shimores. Namasonga Bashim lamrim Shimo. In a Dudu Sondan dinares. That Dudu begin by Tan Dinalola, Tangare Selade. Garsorata Kivu Chungwe Lange Rimba Nyapsalanze Kivu Jinge Lange Rimba Nyapsalanze Kivu Chimbe Lange Rimba Ta Nyapsalanze Senata Dukara Shiki Reswa 다 지단게 나라서 가서라다 간사 치 상갸워치게 상기 살람도에 제가 람고주네 파르마신 바게 림바디 단디게 나시리야 에스로
So Geshe is saying that the very topic that we are dealing here with is this very lamp to the on the path to enlightenment. And so actually, if you look at it, you can see that this is a very, very abbreviated presentation, very short text. Yeah. So while on the one hand, it's a short and abbreviated text, if you think about everything that is mentioned here in a vast way, then the complete great stages of the path, the lamrim chenmo, is completely included here. And so that means that this lamp on the path to enlightenment actually includes the stages of the path of somebody of the small scope and how to train in those, and the stages of the path that are to be trained in by somebody of this middle scope, and the stage of the path that need to be trained in by somebody of the great scope. Yeah? So in this way, all these different topics of the lamrim chenmo and all of these different stages of the path are included here. So actually, this text is described as a text that is showing how one single person will get through all the different stages from the very first, the beginning stage, through all the stages to the final result of complete enlightenment.
Rede kab diri kibu rab drin tama sum she indo kala kibu chung drin chenpo sum she indo kala ta kayansana che che den deyan che yang dabar che den chi deyan dini sen di didu utola sanlama dange kyawa chingma penje ge dini ngona che ge ta digi ngone dhugen chi kyawa chingma penje ge ta 가서 왔더니 동행이 쭉 뽑아라 배송문에 시간시 어디에 질라더니 기부세는 당연히 자기 없어.
So what this is talking about is the word that is used in Tibetan is the word being. Yes, a being of the small scope, middle scope, and great scope, or a small being, a middling being, and a great being. So this word needs to be understood in this context here. So when we talk about a being here, we talk about somebody who is actually working on a spiritual path, somebody who is actually trying to achieve a spiritual state, a spiritual goal. Because in general, of course, we're all beings, all sentient beings, as the English translation already says, all sentient beings are beings. Yeah? So we are all beings. But here in this context, a being is one of the three. Yeah? This one of the three is either a small being, a middle being, and a great being. And all of these three are actual Dharma practitioners, people who are really involved in Dharma, and not just a little bit something, but they are doing a perfect and pure Dharma on their level. Yeah? So in other words, this is all beings that are not concerned with this life whatsoever. Yeah? So they're way beyond that level. So there's a certain kind of being that is really living its life and practicing spirituality with regard to future lives only. And then there's another one that is actually engaging into the practice of really getting rid of all sufferings and its causes. Yeah? So this kind of spiritual practitioners are called here a being when we talk about the three types of beings.
야, 나 니바 중원 셔발라 니 기부 숨기 남샤 버테. 니 기부 숨기 남게 가서 층이 소소는 셔바스 다데라. 다 담보들라 되는 자외 다 아디샤가 자와들레겨 중원 진다 초 교르베스. 기부 숨도 셔발 차 시야와들레서 중원 기부 중원 진다 기부 초도 교르베. 기부 숨도 셔발 차 되게 오래서 대다 층이 랍세we 소소 여와 되버자 대다 소소 게더니 세니 기부 충을 간다질 쓰게래 기분 뒤 간다질 쓰게래 기부 충을 서다 간다질 쓰게래 되게 라나 소소게 세니라고 된다고 와데마 다마 셰기니 순가 되어자기니.
So as Geshe is already talking about these beings, this is actually already indicating the next verse, the second verse. And so here in our commentary, there is a certain section which is called explaining the actual body of the text. And this has two parts here. An abbreviated presentation of the three beings, and then the extensive one, or the explanation of the individual characteristics of the three beings. And so this brings us to the first verse connected with this, which is verse 2 here. Understand that there are three kinds of persons. It says here persons, I said beings, so that's the word that we were talking about, because of their small, middling, and supreme capacities. I shall write clearly distinguishing the individual characteristics. Yeah, so that's the topic that is introduced here, that there is these three kinds of beings, of persons, of the small person, middling being, and middling person, and supreme being. And so Lama Atisha says he will distinguish them by the characteristics. It will clearly point out what these persons are respectively.
Tenya Gondo, Chanju Lange Drama Rabdu Saura Chas, the Sindago Yare. Chanju Lange Drama Rabdu Saura Chas, Singama Yagashina, Tomba Damja the Shiger, Tomba Damja. Tomba Damjagi are Sine Chanjuk Sechwa. Chanjuk Della, the name Shugu de Shana, Shugu. Shugu. Di Chanjuk La Shana. Oh, Shugu Tobrachiga Lamge. Lams and a Chugu Topchig Lam. Drama Seladu, that the name of Saura Chicken. Mishibe Narazo Momba in Rimba, and I said, Saura Chene, Chugunda Chejorba, with a drama. Drama's Rabdu Savrichat, and Digi Shunchi begin a shaking in some Yorba. She shall. That was it. That Dino Daran de Shejadu. Chanjuk Lam de Chidavishana, Chanjuk Lam the Kandachede, Chir Kibu Sheba, Simje, Yinuchola, Jokjang, Simjatamje Kibu rest. Yinian Dir Kibu get Dir Kanaka Dirshe, Kibu said the Tonda, get some Kibu said see the condition in Jugure Saladan, Purusha, Tenshaba, Nuba jokes, that and that. Then catch him with Cheba, Nuba Chila, what the nation knew the Kansajala, Kibusan, Juguya, yes. How goes on? What the lover?
So the commentary here is first kind of repeating a little bit like what was the the promise or the the pledge that Atisha was taking, where he was saying, I will clarify utterly the lamp on the path to enlightenment. Yeah? So this is this kind of a promise to compose and to explain was made. And so within that, Geshe says, when we say here the path, the lamp to the path to enlightenment. So when we, of course, in the Tibetan it's the other way around, it's the enlightenment path of lamp. So the first verse is enlightenment, therefore. So this enlightenment is actually referring, in this case, to the Dharmakaya. Yeah, so enlightenment refers to the Dharmakaya, and the path is then that which is a path to attain that Dharmakaya. Yeah, the path to enlightenment. And then here the text was called the lamp, is that it will illuminate what all these different stages of a path that attains the Dharmakaya or enlightenment. Yeah, so that's expressed here, and then this leads to this question of a person. It says, like, what is this path to enlightenment about? And then it says that in general, a person is the same like a sentient being. Yeah? So this is normally how we would posit a person. But here in this context, yeah, the meaning of this expression of this term is Purusha. Yeah, the Sanskrit word for person. And Purusha is to be understood as somebody who brings about meaning or achieves something, or somebody who has a capacity with regard to bringing about meaning. So this is actually what we have to understand here with regard to what is a Purusha, what is a being or a person.
근데 인데다 지딘 치마 펜색에 된 투비스 기부 충무디 계시거다. 기부 충무디라다 지딘 치마 펜색에 된 두개. 지딘 치마 펜색에 된 두배 누바던 덴베나 기부스라고 야 에스카드라. 그 기부 충무디 첨부 간데는 지딘 치마 펜색에 된 두개 책이야 봐. 충무디야 다 융타데 충무디야 지딘 치마 펜색에 된 두개 책이야. 내가 기부스라고 해야겠어. 자신. 제가 지금 치마 펜색에 다 가서 그러더니 대외 유튜브에다 동행이 죽병 왔지. 지금 치마 펜색에 란도르쳐 봤으나 봐. 지금 치마 펜색에 대외 유튜브에 지금 치마 펜색에 동행이 죽병 게我一些吃完是那生地说，生的你把有在地上蹲着了。今天起码偏这个台湾出吧，今天起码偏这个东岸山呀，东岸有就半夜个屯大了，其他个你把这地上的蹲着了。我的了，吃完米是讲米是讲啥意思？我的了米了不是米是不是这瓜的是我的，基本送。미송 야나 미충은 미침보스네 기부충은 디 침보스라데 나라도라 가야서 소스스 나라 미충은 민디 미침보스라나 대범다 이네 기부충은 디 침보스라 대범시도 어떤 아주 칼자로 되게 셔든다 되래가
미디 카레 미 가서 가서 미도 카레 잉고마레스 카레 추칭이레스 게제
왔다 가서 미디 기부들이다
Yeah, so then this continues here by saying, because somebody possesses the capacity to achieve the meaning or the aims of future worlds and so forth, like kind of starting from the level of achieving the means, the meaning of the aims of future worlds, it says here wordly, so literally. So and that means the future lives. Yeah. So from there onwards, yeah, kind of this is the bare minimum, but is also able to has also capacity to achieve the aims of other things higher than that. Yeah. So starting from there, from achieving the benefits of future lives, from there onwards and higher levels of achievement also, because somebody possesses this kind of capacity, such a person is called here a being. And because somebody has the great intelligence or mental attitude of a conduct of adopting and discarding with regard to the future lives and so forth, yeah. Therefore, such a person would be called a man in the sense of humanity, like I think we talk about mankind. Yeah? So a member of mankind as a man in that sense, yeah? Not a man, not woman, but a man. Does it make sense in English? Yeah? Like any human is called a man somehow, isn't it? Like in mankind. So this kind of thing, yeah? A human. Yeah? Somebody is called a human because he has this kind of capacity. But actually, the meaning here is not human, like having this kind of body, being of the human species and so forth, but again, the meaning is actually a being in this context, or a human in this context, a person in this context, because he has this intelligence of the conduct of adopting and abandoning with regard to future lives and higher states even. So what is this abandoning and adopting, or conduct that abandons and adopts? So one is achieving all the virtuous side, all the cause of happiness of future lives, and one is abandoning all the non-virtuous side, the causes for suffering in future lives. Yeah? So somebody has this kind of understanding, and therefore the intelligence for such a conduct, for such a practice with regard to future life, or even higher goals than that. And because of that capacity, this person is called a human, a man, a person, a being.
Oh yeah. Those good touching. Yeah. That's in the bottom. Turn to again. Cindy to that. Cindy to that some games in by Yana. They come did on the Kibu set and that Kibunala Yomar, Kibuchuna Yomar, and Gina Chimona Yomares. Woko Kibuna Yomares, and then Dineshe Kibudina Yomares.
Yeah, Dito Machigan.
Cindy, Jenna Kudu, and Kudu.
Nami Chivaris, Kare Tenzo Kare, Chiva Yuna, Chi Dang Chogaris.
Progress.
So I was a little distracted because somebody sent me here a message asking if people can ask questions anytime. So ask Geshe. Geshe says like anybody can ask a question at any time. Last one.
Oh, that's right. Shazza Tana the Karshagi, Sendi Tunda. Sendibatam dos, Ron Dibatam Tunda Nevalas. Didn't Miam Kibusila Gumaresla de Tanda Sendi Tunda. Musico, social music, Sendichu Tunda, some time at that and Mitela. Can did Kibusuna or Yamaresuna. Chunala Chigumares did the out. Shambota the Vegan.
So then the next line is saying, therefore, that being the case, then if somebody is only aiming at merely this life here, then such a person would not be counted amongst the being or the human, the person that is taught in this context. Yeah? So the person in this context is not including any person. It is not a person that is only interested in this life, because such a person would not even be a person of the small scope, let alone of the middle scope or great scope.
Tedarayanta, Bubum Lesta, the Dinsari, Lobin Casa, Katama Givation Chimbo, Carrero, Tensions. Bubum Katama Givation Sur. Get away. That did not take it. Oh, yeah, thank you, sir. Kadama Lama Shirwata. Bubum Sepeshik Mimre. The Kadama Lama Jons, the Kadam Lama Tende Haguya, the dinner Tingimindu. Oh, Dina La Kansana, Karsungdo, Sna Lama de Karson Kadama Goshin de Karsungdo Sna, Chimar Nyason Jibe, Chimar Nyason Jibe, Dick Bongs, the Babongres. Kue Ten, Quality Gen Tension, then Tapan Debes. Tapan Debe, Dinshi Tsug Labasumla, Jukres. Tapan Membalan Jigbe, Chanjuksem Jongores. Dedabuni, Mi Juba Tinishgores, Mi Juba de. How was some? Shendonani, Chish Minis. Shendon, Miss Lagmar did do the Chibijan level. Didn't do the social the turned out it's how much girl. They meet Maras, they don't do the Chibijan. Adam Lamade.
So this is backed up here by a quote from a text which is called Beo Bum, and is a text composed by some Kadampa Geshe, the name of who doesn't come to Geshe right now, but anyway, from such a Kadampa Geshe's text, it says here.
Kadamba Geshe, Delbauer. Not Delbauer.
Okay. So Geshe just found the name. This is a Kadampa Geshe Delbauer. He composed this text. And so he says, through the fear of the lower realms or the evil gone realms in future lives, one abandons negativities. And by reminding oneself or bringing to my memory to become mindful of the faults of samsara, one wishes for liberation, and therefore one engages into the 3 higher trainings in the way of the 4 noble truths, by way of the 4 noble truths. And through fearing the Hinayana, one trains in one generates the Bodhi mind. And this kind of activity, this kind of thought and training, that's human behavior. Otherwise, they are not humans whatsoever. So what he's saying here is actually that somebody who is only thinking about this life and has none of these attitudes or practices is not really a human. He's an animal. Because he's doing exactly what an animal is doing. He's only interested in this life. Yeah? And the animals are very able to bring about everything for this life. Yeah? So if people are only interested in what's going on in this life, this is the only attitude, the only aim and so forth, they are actually, the Kadamba Geshe says, they don't have a human behavior. They are like animals. That's what he says.
Kida shimi da cha chiu da tsame koran bu choma chi yinba yina koran tsame chi ya ba. Ila mis la kwa chi mindo wa. Mi jowa ka marwa de.
This is actually quite true if you think about it, what all the birds are doing and what the cats are doing and the dogs are doing and what the insects are doing and what the ants are doing. They are very much concerned with the aspects of this life, and they are able to bring it about. Yeah? They go well, kind of thing. Yeah? So this kind of behavior is not a human behavior, because a human behavior is supposed to be something elevated in comparison to what an animal behavior is. Yeah? So if somebody is only on this life's aims, he's doing like an animal, not like a human.
There's a question here, Geshe, from somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I see it? Oh, I can see it. Huh?
Laura, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. Yes. So my question very quickly is this related to when we meditate or contemplate the precious human rebirth, and we start with the 8 freedoms and endowments, and then we go down to the great meaning. Is this what great meaning means? So using this precious human rebirth to practice Dharma, is it kind of what makes us human, if you like?
Okay. 저랑 얘가 디도 송송아 데네 데네 뭐랑 디 코나 데네 디 카레 밀리 림보지 디라 카레 땡기도라 밀리 림보지 가서 디 카레 카레 칼로리 텔조 디 요라 데네 텔조 디 유나 내가서 디 베지 당고로 봐 나서 카레 추두고로 봐 디티도레스 디라 제가 요르베 탄다 디당 밀리 림보지 디 송이디
어다데 저도 디기부 충무디 임바이네 기부 충무게 처냠네 제겐 미디 다 단조 밀리렌신스 타다게 되다 미임바이나 사임바이네 다고 단다 지기 가서다 단조 밀리렌시 토야 말다 대 가서다 하람지기 최도를 등기산에 대해요 봐
Da kann ich Ladila kann die zeigen
뭐 미스라다 미스데 단다 미스데 가인스라 되게 주주 상대 미진이 봐이나 다 미디 아치마 편제가 되지 두개 받았지 라니라 되게 주주 상마이나야 양 라니 얘네 되게 가서 치마 편제가 된다데 뭐주나 된다도 상대 여 봐이네 양 수수 죽으면은 야 기부 충분한 측이야 말해. 그래서 라인을 상와 나신지 심화 편제가 된다지 두고 얘는 라인 기분 되는 적이야 봐. 사이는 다 미는 줄 알아.
Yeah, so that is, of course, a very great connection here, because obviously both of these parts are talking about that you need to engage into Dharma practice. But the thing is that when you talk about a precious human rebirth, you talk about not just any human being, but somebody who has these qualifications in his or her life by these 8 freedoms and endowments and so forth. So because he has these qualifications in his or her life, then this person is very much enabled to practice Dharma. Yeah? So he has all the good conditions for actually doing that. So then if he doesn't do that, then that means he is only focusing on this life, then again, he would not be counted amongst the human from this presentation here, yeah? Although he even has a precious human rebirth. Yeah. So we are talking about somebody who has a human rebirth, has all these good conditions, and is then using them to actually enter into Dharma practice. If he does that, then this is a human behavior according to what is said here. But you could go further, that there's also gods, for example, that are also practicing Dharma, so they also would then, from that point of view, be counted within this human behavior here. It's coming down to that you practice Dharma or not.
Yeah, that Nana Carla would also not Chimara Nyason Jigbes, Chima Nyason the Java line is running Jigbe. Nyason would do get a change. I Nyason would do get the 10. I Nyason the Java line, then do the bar chicken. Big bones, Slaughter. Jigbe, Nyason the Java line, do the bomber. You let a new mother, that's all let it, huh? Let I is a Migio Chudita. Or Migio Chupon a day, the Nyason and Jigning, the bar chicken. Just like you chungi, Nyamling to the Karansana, Kayasana landed San Tancha, then Migio Chu Chudum Swedere. All that give chunga lam Yami so did it. Chida Midaba combat the Cambridge about the Mango Shirjun with the did Yamling so the Kayasana, then Migio Chudum Swedere.
So in this quote from this Kadampa Geshe, the first thing was that through the fear of the evil grown realms in the future lives, one gives up on the negativities. Yeah, what's going on here is that somebody brings to mind what kind of horrible experiences are possible in future lives if you should go to these lower realms, and what you would have to experience there. And because of bringing that to mind and fearing that this might be a reality for you, one gives up on the negativities. And what this is especially talking about here is that one gives up certain actions, certain karmas. Yeah? So one does not create negative karma that would otherwise kind of bring us to this kind of results in a future life. And so when we talk about giving up karma or being careful with our actions, then this is mainly talking about that we give up on the 10 non-virtuous actions. Yeah, so this kind of ethical discipline of giving up the 10 non-virtuous actions. And so this is an ethical discipline, and this becomes the main practice of such a person, which is expressed here by saying, due to this fear, giving up negativities. Yeah, that's the main practice. Of course, there's many other practices included in the small scope, like thinking about impermanence, going for refuge, and so forth. But in the end, what this is all about is that this person will give up the 10 non-virtuous actions, which is a form of ethical discipline. So that's the main practice of that person. And in this way, he abandons negativity. It's the cause for such a rebirth in the lower realms. And so this kind of activity of restraining yourself or refraining from engaging to any of these 10 non-virtuous actions, in other words, practicing an ethical discipline, where you discipline yourself, refrain, and so forth, from these 10 non-virtuous actions, that becomes the main cause also for taking a higher rebirth, yeah, for a good rebirth. So this is what somebody on this level would mainly focus on.
Jamru Yandaba Shivuche, Jamru Bumdam Bumsa, Jamru Yandaba Shivucheva in a young. That and that guy is a Mijum to the Masona and Son Jibala kept 2 matters.
So Geshe actually said that this is then an ethical discipline that one would bring into one's daily life, yeah, and one would check one's actions in the daily life and refrain in the daily life from doing this kind of negative actions. And so that's the core practice here. This is the main factor that protects you from these lower wrongs. So let's say that somebody is taking refuge every day. Every day practices very good refuge and maybe even many refuge, and he brings together big numbers of having taken refuge, like hundreds of thousands and so forth. But he doesn't practice the ethical discipline that gives up the 10 non-virtuous actions. That practice of refuge will not protect that person from the lower wrongs.
나들 이제 미기주봉의 추름디 송기에나 점로 특식 마데나에 녀손디기 말스다 좀다 껴시마데.
And this, the meaning of this is, on the other hand, also, if you are abiding by an ethical discipline that abandons the 10 non-virtuous actions, and you don't go for refuge a single time, you will still be protected from the lower wrongs.
나들 다 점로 되냐 대 가인스나 먼저 미기주봉의 추름디 양다바지 송투에게 된다를 봐. 점리제 점르체 점군조 송라 이식 대바여나 딜랍자 점르그 랍자 미기주봉 추름 송에 대 땅한테 양다바 송투고 봐. 그것도 된다 데레스.
But the point, therefore, of going for refuge is that this is becoming an aid for us to be able to keep this ethical discipline that abandons the 10 non-virtuous actions. Yeah. So in refuge, what you're doing is you are generating great faith in the Buddha Dharma Sangha as the refuge jewels, and having done that, out of this faith, you also want to abide by the trainings that you're given out of having taken refuge, and which comes again down to this ethical discipline of the 10 non-virtuous actions. So in that context, you then engage into abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions.
지난 와네 시기를 이내 다기고 중원에 내갑수 가인스나 다치고 미답에 싸울 땅에 미답에 공개 치원지 가서 치외다 녀송인지 동해들은 지금 점르지야 얘네 점르그 랍자 추신도다 냠솔라야 다 점르 랍자 추신도 냠솔라바스나다 미종 추르송에들에 렌델 섬네로 어디 다치다 와네 시기르데 얘네 다 된다르 되레스 다기고 중국에서다 냠님 무시르 되레스로.
And of course, this is just the how I say, the opening verse for the three beings. So there will be a more in detail discussion about all the practice of the being of the small scope afterwards. But just in a nutshell, what is going on here, that such a person of the small scope would reflect on impermanence, like means actually mortality, or like the impermanence to death, yeah, so that you actually will die, and that after death there is that there will be a rebirth, and within that there is a possibility of actually going to a very bizarre or very distorted rebirth, an evil gone wrong, and then fearing that kind of state, one goes for refuge. And together with this refuge, within this refuge, one adopts refuge trainings. And these refuge trainings are especially this ethical discipline of giving up the 10 non-virtuous actions, but this comes together also with having reflected on actions and their results. Yeah? So becoming clear about karma to some extent. So knowing about karma, having gone for refuge, one takes these trainings of refuge, and in the end, this comes down to the ethical discipline of abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions.
다드네 지오마데 코에준 텐스라고다 코에준데 가래서 코에 난게 단요라 되게 동해 되게 강해 되게 나라도 코하나 깨와 상게되는 깨 동해 가외 동해 나외 동해 다른 치외 동해에서 여러와 내가라도 리주 가바케바 얘네 다 되게 장냐래 다 대세게 말에 소속은 더바 더베 된다게디 다 제외 동해 민두베 짱짱 수도 토도 법에 동해 조에 매버지 중에 동해 다 될라서 받더니 얘네 얘네 봄비 동해서 서바다 동해는 리 나서 여행 말했어 봐 어디게도 코에 겨레 동해장에 계셨었다.
And so going to the next part of this quote from this Kadampa Geshe's writing, it says here, so the next person is bringing to mind or remembering the faults of samsara. And what this is talking about is all the different suffering or dissatisfactory states within samsara, all the sufferings. So you take birth in samsara, and that in itself is already a suffering. Yeah, so the very birth in samsara is already dissatisfactory, is in the nature of suffering. And then on top of that, you start aging immediately afterwards. You're getting sick, you die in the end, and so forth. So these four are omnipresent. And then you don't only think about this happening to you in this life or in the human realm, but you think about the 6 types of migration, the different types of beings, and how this is all these different possible rebirth forms are pervaded by this kind of suffering. So wherever you are in samsara, you will encounter this kind of suffering states. And this suffering is actually something that we can address as that what we don't want. We don't want suffering. Yeah? So instead of being free and being separated from that what we don't want, yeah, being liberated from that, we have it all the time. And there's also no ending to that. It comes again and again and strongly. Yeah? So all of these kind of different aspects of suffering in samsara are included here when it says that somebody brings to mind the faults of samsara.
고에게 껴서라 나도 동해장에 계셔서 나도 주를 내가 너무 쓰레인 거 대한 껴래 되게 다 껴. 대한 고에 껴래 예잖아.
So actually right now we have just touched on all these different forms of suffering that are described in the text and so forth, and they are all included in what is said here, that somebody brings to mind the faults of samsara. But actually these kind of sufferings, they have causes. Yeah, so they come from afflictions, they come from karma ripening and so forth. Yeah, so also these causes Geshe would include here in these faults of samsara. So somebody who was bringing to mind the flaws or the faults of samsara will think of all the sufferings and their causes, the karmas and afflictions.
그래. 나 고에 껴인 게 탈투바데 가라에서는 머리바스를 시작이야. 껴인 게 탈투바데 머리바스를 하기야.
So the final fault of samsara, or that what you kind of reach when you go to the bottom of samsara, the actual fault and flaw that you find there is actually ignorance.
싸원답들에 당한서 고에 난게 껴 탐색에 싸원답들 머리바스 하는 거.
Because this ignorance is like the root out of which all the other sufferings and problems and faults of samsara grow or arise.
제가 저 머리바인데서 머리바여서 대왕의 차당 셈라서에 뉴모 남라 되게 되게 대왕의 레다마라 되게 됐어. 리두 가와께가 있나다 과대 깐장 끼기요. 되게 나와 동해지마도 매라 봐. 이게 다 코이견스 되다.
So this ignorance is acting as a root. So this ignorance is as acting as a root out of which then all these other afflicted minds like attachment, anger, and so forth, actually a whole list of afflictions, a whole plethora of afflictions is generated, on the basis of which we are then accumulating karma, and then these karmas again ripen into lives and experiences within samsara, and that this kind of experiences and feelings and experiences of in samsara are only the nature of suffering is very clear when you look at where it comes from. It comes from ignorance, afflictions, and the karmas ripening into this kind of feelings, experiences, and so forth. Yeah? So all of this we bring to mind when we take here this phrase where it says, bringing to mind the faults of samsara.
나 코이 견데 그냥 하고서 나 코이 견데 탐절라 탐도 예 대면함 자다가 패마서 다 가르쳐 버렸으나 딘시 추기스 담바실로 로창고리스 버다 딘시 내주되게 시야바 차자 람라바송 년이 저거레스 거래
And so, having brought to mind all these faults of samsara, the causes of suffering, the sufferings, how the whole process functions, how all samsara is working, you generate a wish to be free from that, to be without that. Yeah? In other words, a wish to be liberated from that, to get out of that. Yeah? So that in itself will not be of so much use. It will not end your suffering. And it's not just by you thinking about, oh, samsara is so problematic. I have all these problems. I have all these sufferings. Everything is dissatisfactory and so forth. I wish I would be out. So kind of like making like a wishing prayer or something. So the wishing prayer is not going to get you out. This would take a strong practice. And this practice is also described here. It says that you are engaging into the 3 higher trainings by way of the 4 noble truths. Yeah, so what this is indicating is that you need to train the mind, you need to work with the mind, and the first thing that you need to train, or actually to some extent, first of all, study, understand, is this mode of the 4 noble truths. Yeah, by understanding this mode or this manner of the 4 noble truths, on that basis, you then can actually engage in the practice of the 3 higher trainings in order to get liberated from all these faults of samsara.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Just going back, sorry, a bit to the lower scope, precious human rebirth. So someone who doesn't have a precious human rebirth can practice all those 10, abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions and presumably gain, a pleasant human rebirth next, maybe even a precious human rebirth next. So you don't need to have a precious human rebirth to practice the 10 non-virtuous actions. So why do you need it at all for lower scope? Does that make sense?
Yeah. 제가 공지는 밀리 rinpoche 메나양 가르 대저 게 대저 마상나 대저나 데네 디더부 미이나 인양 밀리 rinpoche 말이스 밀리오레 디더부 미 지글라 가르 미게바 추봉이 주는 용요로와 mi giver true born to the Nyamen China, then it come Yankee Kare million chi. So the question was why would somebody of the small scope need a precious human rebirth?
No, not quite. It's,
like the last thing what Geshe says, it's exactly like you say, such a person would not have to be a Buddhist. Was that the question maybe?
Yes, kind of, yeah. So you don't need a precious human rebirth to practice the lower scope. Is that right?
기부 충을 냠는 지혜라 미르 rinpoche 고민도와. Yeah, in order to do the main practice of a reading of the small scope, you don't need a precious human rebirth. Nangba yang and like just ask again. So again, you also don't have to be a Buddhist. You don't have to have a precious human rebirth. You don't have to be a Buddhist. You have to do this practice. And this is because the main thing here in this in the small scope is that that he needs to guard this ethical discipline of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. So when we look at the presentation in the text, yeah, then it would very much appear that what is described here is somebody who's a being of the small scope and is a Buddhist. So that's what this is describing here, because it is saying that first of all that it has a precious human rebirth, then that this rebirth can be lost. You think about impermanence and death. Then you go for refuge. So this is where it becomes a Buddhist. Then I think this person is thinking about karma, cause and effect, and then finally on the base of all of that is then engaging into the practice of abandonment and non-religious action. So if you look at all of that, the manner it is explained, it seems to refer to somebody who is A, of the small scope, and B, actually a Buddhist.
Yes, sir.
Midila kare kiwi shinin guidui.
Yes, change the go to.
Die kare Mühle Rinpoche Megen, die kare mit ihrer Chubonge zu dem die La.
Chiruba the Mango Yarba. Hindu and the Mango Yarba. Okay.
Niente. Chiruba kare kiwi shinin I think So I dare to put on my own question, does such a person need a guru, a teacher, a spiritual friend? And so Geshe says, yes, he will need, but this might be a virtuous friend or kind of a teacher or a guru of another system. Yeah, so of a non-Buddhist system, for example, yeah, which also teaches that you should abstain from negative actions and so forth. So in that, this person will need some kind of teacher of whatever system that teaches him or the ethical discipline.
And can I just follow up and ask? Sorry, can I just follow up and ask then? Is there more power? Is there like more the virtuous seeds that you're creating are more powerful if you're thinking about future lives, if you're thinking about karma, if you're thinking about refuge, whereas if you're not thinking about those, they have less power. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about somebody who doesn't believe in reincarnation and yet does.
Yeah, like a Buddhist or a non-Buddhist practicing the same 10 non-virtuous actions. They'll both get them to a human life next, maybe a precious human life next, but there must be more power in there, I guess, if the more you're thinking about future lives.
저는 코그니티브 탄다 디로와 미치 카레 남바레스 tani 카레 mi kiva chubongi 기출디 냐면 지거와 미 신에기 냐면 남바 마레스 라 공치르버레스 디 강라 치르버 디 카레 기바 나치라 이지오 마레스 이냥 소수 주룩디 카레 기바 나치 킬링이 두스 이네 양디나나 카레 추든디 요르바 미 기바 chubongi 추든디 요르바 지금 die da 냠는 지나 den 공기 양케 카레 미르 림보제 미르 림보제 디톱 투비르바 제장 남ben 냠는 디 가빌라 안 남바 이men 냠는 디 카레 디 슈 돌아 카레 키바 요르베 그래서 남바 디 카레 냠도 요르바 디 냠도 카레 레듐들 라 산도 땅 요르바
슈터라 코베 레그네톨 체게 다 네 군조가 까니 세네로와 군조가 까니 미리 주봉 수준 송에 군조가 까니 상로 슈심보지 예스기라 봐 하고서 제가 군조게다 미기 외주 싸우네 미지 송에 군조가 까니 제가 나한테 야다바 두고니 껴나고 두고니 슈침부 얘기를 돼. 제 슈치 좀 개발 있어 맞더라.
슈치 좀 개발민도스. So Geshe feels like that somebody might say the omniscient, all-pervasive Creator God has forbidden that. I shall not do that. He gave this law. You should not do that. Out of my respect for this God, I will not do that. Yeah. So this can be very strong. Can be a very strong mind that is like a very strong reasoning, a very strong motivation behind that, abandoning the term of virtuous actions. And so Geshe feels like there would not be a difference in strength with regards to such a Buddhist practice of abandoning of virtuous action on the basis of thinking about karma and so forth and refuge, or somebody else who is also very strongly taken by his belief of the Creator God has forbidden that, I shall not do that, therefore I'm going to abstain from that. He doesn't feel there's a difference in strength.
Yeah, that the name of the Shege, Dinshi Tsugi, Labasum Juk said the Shege, Dinshi Tsugi is Lade, Tanganzo Koi Ken Tangela, Ken Data Tamjela Tarkuyaris. 고이견의 타르토는 머리바드레스.
Mhm.
델레 타르고야. 머리발라 타나 레레 타르고야. 델레는 제부 동에 탐자라 타르고야. 레다 뉴모 세베 타르스 타르바레 타르바.
Mhm.
제가 다 레다 뉴모 세디 가라 자네 세고야르스는 템바시르 자네. 고이견데가디 딩시라 로 자네 세고야. 딩시라 로 자네 조다 동에데 마시.
Mhm.
동해 덴바데 가라 에스라는 디게 나네 동해 데바 미다바시야데 들라라도 동해와시야데 들라라도 다 이네 동화다 담이시 다 동화다 담이 머리바 매바 송에데 담에도 싫었더래
Mhm.
하고서 뉴모 껴나 머리 지소라 다른 종 로이 통주지 다니 디유도 또 하잖아 내셔봐야 다는 거 버치 에스라보다 뉴모 베껴 코에껴 같이 지겨봐 이나 뜻한지 당지 머리발에 때는 중화래스 제가 당지 주기 담이데 다든 까고야래스 담에도 두고야래스 하고서 다음에보다 돈은 다 뉴모 베껴 탄자 통인 거야 다 뉴모 탄자 때는 갈래갈래 bungu 된다 알았다 알레디질라나
So we're here in that part of the phrase that said that somebody here would then engage into the Siha trainings by way of the mode of the Four Noble Truths. So such a person would therefore have as a main practice to really reflect on this Four Noble Truths, the true sufferings, true origins, true cessation, true path, and within that he would especially put an emphasis on the true sufferings and study that, yeah, and do that especially by way of the four aspects of the First Noble Truth. Yeah. So within these four aspects, the first one, impermanence, is a pretty straightforward, and also the second one, being in the nature of suffering, is also quite doable. And then comes the third one, empty and selfless, as the fourth. Yeah, so these ones are then the actual crucial things, because from that you understand how things actually are, because especially the last one, selfless, is that if you have a wisdom of selflessness, a wisdom realizing selflessness, then here you have that what destroys this ignorance, the cause of all your suffering. Yeah. So the actual problem is this, that all the suffering that we have in samsara is arising from the ignorance that is grasping for a self or is apprehending a self. Yeah. So from that, all the suffering comes, all the afflictions, all the karma, and from that, all the suffering experiences. So what we want to do, we want to establish that there is no such self that is grasped at here by ignorance. Yeah. We want to establish selflessness. And if we are able to bring about such an establishment, such an understanding, such a realization of selflessness, then on that basis, all the afflictions will be done away with. At least a kind of there's going to be a certain process with this wisdom realizing selflessness. You will be slowly able to cut off layer by layer of the afflictions, and that will actually bring about the liberation from the suffering.
This one.
Mhm.
하고서 담에도 be 싫어겠다 내가 소구야래 쓰러봐 대답이 내가 써야 되니 싫어 대라 싫어게 라바슬라야래
Mhm.
근데 싫어게 라바 뿌다바지 용알아 쓴 뜻이 땡인들이 슉심보시 고구야래 대답이 쓴다 땡인쟁게 뜻이 땡인들이 야고시 용알아 라바 추릉게 라바디 뭔가 마소나 요야 말했어 제가 라바 숨이 냠니세데 어디 나왔다 용과 주제 데레스 딘시 추게 라바 숨라
So in a nutshell, yeah, the meaning or what we can take out of this whole phrase here is that in the beginning there was this bringing to mind all the faults of samsara, and all these faults of samsara can be done away with by a wisdom that is realizing selflessness. Yeah, so this wisdom realizing selflessness destroys the ignorance out of which all these faults of samsara are arising. So to bring about such a wisdom, realizing selflessness, to destroys the ignorance, that is a practice of a higher practice and the higher training of wisdom. Yeah. So this higher training of wisdom will only turn out very powerful and strong if it is based on concentration, which is the mind that is single-pointedly, yeah? and a very strong form of mind that is strong due to the single-pointedness. And that is the higher training of concentration. Yeah? So the higher training of wisdom depends on the higher training of concentration. But this concentration will only come about if you are an ethical person, if you have pacified your mind, you're able to restrain yourself by ethical discipline. So therefore, this is based on the higher training of ethical discipline. And in this way, you have all three higher trainings.
태반면배 라친징 삼배 군는람배 된 타바 라인 주고 타로 되는 게 삼바들은 지네 태는 게 삼바는 지네 하고서 제가랑 라치구 돈도데 타바 돈은 이외 삼바 게 되네 라인 주고 타바를 터스나 되네 타바 이네양 되네 가수라다 라니 베다 가서 라친진 시부지 왕도 하되게 요다 두즈 근데고 임바 인도 되네 어디 내주들 지gne 라친진 삼백 군들라인 라네 되네 람라바스 뭐냐면이나 다 가리나 디 참아 견전샤데 견전 견다 잡아 차르고야 어디란 지gne 딱 가는스나 전juk 셈 종 참아도 인지 전juk 셈도 종고래스 What did that way? Me Sheba. Me Sheba to get the sum dress. Me Sheba the sum dress. Shendona, what that Karestana? Me Sheba Marisura. That them to reach about the Chiviganes.
So Geshe says this is kind of what is described here in this text with regard to the person of the middling scope, but we will have a verse on this, so it's going to be more on this later on. So then it continues here saying like by way of fearing the Hinayana. Yeah, so that's how it goes on, talking about the Mahayana practitioner. So by way of fearing or being afraid of the Hinayana. So what is this talking about? This is talking about being afraid of the Hinayana attitude. And the Hinayana attitude is that you're trying to get liberated from all this suffering of samsara, all the faults of samsara. In other words, you are interested in changing your life. Yeah? You will engage into this three higher trainings, and in this way you will counteract the true sufferings and so on, the true origins, and will get liberated. So your mind will change, but what you will be left with is this self-centered attitude that is only looking at your development. Yeah? And so this is called selfishness or egotism, if you like. So literally it says self-cherishing. So you're afraid of this self-cherishing, that you would only kind of work for your own ends and not see anybody else in that. So by the fear of the Hinayana, by fearing this being left with this self-cherishing world or this self-cherishing attitude, you are then training in the Bodhi mind. Yeah? So that's the...
Sumni도 shepherd chade, Takibu Sumge Lam de Sumranes, shepherd chades. Lami Chanju to trigger Lam Telas, Lanami be Chanju to trigger Lam Tela, Dini, Kayasana, Chungo Mondelam, Jin Nelegalam, Cho the Jubaden, Sangi Nige Lam Songe Chiros, Chadan de Kayasana, Yesi, Kiran, Kibu Chimbu Lam Yamichi, Kansachi Nimba Yinea, Kiran Dinshi, Yamni Chagorba. Oh, Lam Lavasong Yamni Chagorba. Oh, the niche Castle Migichum Chudum Yamni Chagorba. Oh, Midaba Santan or temperature in Yasun Miki was Sandwich Tangorba. Koi can take a Santangorba. Chasa de Kainsna, what up Sumbu Diata, Tumu to do a lamb slow, that Tumu to do it. Give Chumo the Tumu lamb. Give Jin Tumu lamb. Give Chimbo the Tumu lambs. Ladachi.
You Chimbo?
Chimbo the Tumu lamb.
Okay.
Right? 다 전에 기부 원래 기분 진다 투모라 기부 치모도 첨부 투모라 라비스타 기부 치모도 투모라 기분 진다 투모라 기부 첨별람 시나 어디래 다 드리 기부 첨별 가사데 고 기부 충분히 야 연구 기분 진다 연구를 기부 첨별 야래고 야래 와 이 상기 니게 람소 야래서
Alle Sangini Lam. So in this way we have heard about these three practices or three paths of the three beings, and then it says here, and something like that is human behavior. Anything else it is not. Yeah, so it comes down to this statement that if you do not practice any of this level, then you actually are behaving more like an animal actually. And further, then it says here, in this way, there has been the path of the three beings presented, and these are the paths. There is three paths. There's these three types of beings, and not anything else. And then it goes on and says, like, if you are following the path that is leading you to unsurpassed enlightenment, then you also will have to train in the path of a higher rebirth as in the context of the small being, and you also you also have to train in the path of the common definite goodness, what this is called, in other words, liberation of the middling being. So in a nutshell, what this says is, even if you are somebody who is training in the Mahayana path, such a person also needs to reflect on and meditate on the Four Noble Truths, needs to practice the three higher trainings, also needs to practice the ethics that is giving up the 10 non-virtuous actions. Yeah? Or from the other way around, such a person will think about impermanence, will take refuge also, will think about the faults of samsara and so on. Yeah? So all of that, these aspects that are included in the small and middling scope are also to be reflected on by the person of the great scope. And so therefore we have this expression which says, when the practices of the small scope are described, that these are paths that we have in common with the small scope. And with regard to the middle scope, these are paths that are in common with the middle scope. And then for the great scope, that's our scope. So this is the path of the great scope. This is not what we have in common with somebody else, but that's us. So we have certain practices in common with the practice of a small scope, in common with this middling scope, and then we have the actual great scope path. And that path of the great scope is the path of the Buddha himself.
다 기부송게 람대야서 rab도 세와때 고 신도 라와 디오르자와 인데 단데레제다 고대보전에 세보전에 되게 인송거다 람대다자 랑게 뭐 춤버지데 생인게 권에서 람대다서 람송부디 기부 충분히 침부송게 람대다 뭐 스나디 뭐 가레스 춤버지데 생인게 권에서나 춘주로 데레지 기부 충분히 람데르다 기분 딩게 람데르다서 지어와 오데르 다마시 인송거라 생인게 권에다 소소예와 시기 니스 람송게 뭐다 개발된 줄 민다고 권에 다마 디기 인송거라
And so then the text just is saying that these different paths here, these different levels of practice will be made clear, and so that it's easy to understand them. And what Lama Atisha is going to do here, he's going to identify the entity of these three different paths by way of looking at the characteristics or the different aspects of those paths. And then he simply says that he's going to look at these different paths in detail.
This one? 다데네 기부송게 칭이 마셔다 니바 기부송게 람게 칭이 소소로 셰발라 송 기부 중은 칭이 기분 딩게 기부 첨도 칭이 간시 탑니 간다기 얘는 코에 대와 짬 달라스 런이 된도 니르 셰바 기부 되네 타마르 시 소들에.
Okay, so so this leads us here in the commentary to a next headline, which is explaining the individual characteristics of the path of the three beings, which then of course has the three subdivisions of teaching the characteristics of the small being, teaching the characteristics of the middling being, and teaching the characteristics of the great being. And the first one is then the characteristics of the small being, and then we have the verse 3. So it says here in the verse 3, know that those who by whatever means seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of cyclic existence are persons of the least capacity.
Tendilla, Jungse Macha Shins, Tendillo Dangudwa. Chima Penje, Caso, Chima Penje, Drunugi, Kibugange, Chima Penje Geta, Gawa Samboji Drunugi, Drunugan Kansaji, Inguris. That in a Garesana. Chima that dinner Mangush Lagoda, College Tartobe, me de Wada, Dine, Jajena, Ragala Solatan, Hamigi digits Lagoda. Hamigi de what Tonda New Gang. What the neg Kansa Larwa? Mine, that dig what the neg Hamigi de what Tonda Yen. Calaso, Kejo Gareshaso, Sendilla Michava. Macha Shinche. Chima. 치매기 된 종에게 강사. 그냥 치마드네 삼미기 되게 된다 얘기. 하다미 되게 된다 얘기. 드네 가라. 다들 참발로 속에서 미기 ku에 대와 정달라 미네. 와다다 삼미 쓰는 뒤도 하다미. 와다 드네 된다 얘네. 탑 간데스나 레전드를 이시게 돼봐. 뭔도 송왜 오늘 미기 죽은 거 주름냐니 제게 하고서 든데질라 기부 충스 든데질라고 야래서 알레다 못들라다.
Okay. So here then the commentary is therefore now taking the characteristics out of this verse and describes what is such a being of a small scope. So first of all, it says here the first characteristic is this is somebody who is not attached even in the slightest to this life. Yeah, so he has given up any concern for this life. He has given up on this life. He has let go of this life. And the second one is a person that is capable of is capable of achieving for the future life and so forth. So for many future lives actually. Yeah, so that's the capacity of this being. It's actually working for these future lives. And then comes a longer section. It is listing all kind of wonderful rebirths as a human or different god realms, god states, and so forth. In other words, this is showing what it is aiming at. It is aiming at the happiness of humans and gods. Yeah, this is the aim of this being of the middle of the small scope. And then it says with regard to the method that this person is using. So first, this person is generating a faith of conviction with regard to actions and their results. Yeah, not a blind faith, but a faith of conviction with regard to karma and its result. And having done this first is then engaging into the ethical discipline that abandons the 10 non-virtuous actions. So that's the actual method that this person is using.
Okay, those three. 당한테 대마 지난 돈다게 마 세마 쉐기레스로 알레데 이네 달레단도 도도도 상담게.
So this will all come clearer as we go on in the text, but here in the beginning, just kind of very straightforward, very abbreviated. The meaning is spelled out.
다 간다 간사 랑인게 쳇자와 강아서 쳇자와 다르와 간사 랑인게 토베 된도 녀로 잡아 강인 봐. 다 개와 치마 편지게 되는 3이 되기들이. 저 3이 되게 된 안sol라 탑을 잡고 탑자들이 기부 중국이. 다 3이 되게 돼. 아 되네. 하다 미 개와 라야 돼. 개와 상부시 라야 돼. 되네 고랑게 탑자들 미유를 데려와. 미유를 지금 봐인데 다 미유를 탑에 미유를 두개게 다 줄을라가. 줄을라고 야로라. 얘는 디딘 기부 타마를 쉐버를 샤와 임비실. 그렇아?
Totally. Oh, yeah.
그래도
Okay. So this person, as we have just said, is aiming at this rebirth or this joys of the human realms and of the God realms, the many different God realms, many different levels of God realms, and so aiming at that, this being kind of the object of attainment for this kind of path or this kind of spirituality, the person is then entering into a practice that brings about the causes for such a rebirth.
디야 담배 쳐라 쇼베 디딘 기분이 다 담배 쳐라 쇼바 인데서 캠브리지게도 캠브리지네 데네 렌데 상당기도 내는 미리 주는 거 치료 숨도 제가 담배 쳐라 쇼바 기분이 길라스 시반에 던던예시 과 던던이기도 개와 치마들 하미디 디기지 던던이기도 디 과레스 시바 던던예시스나 시바 과 던던예시 셴들라니 개그차게 셴들 두선배 상주는 민두스 하고서 소스 던다데 마도 소스랑 상당에 마도지 셴게 던두선배 상반은 민두스 제드네 인디 시바 던던예시 셴들라니 개그차게 난 진다 전부는 레면도 딱고 기부도 타마나 하래샤스다.
And so then it says here, this kind of person here has actually entered into the holy Dharma. Yeah? It is practicing parts of the Dharma. It is thinking about impermanence and death. It is taking refuge and so forth. Yeah? So because it is abiding, this person is abiding in the holy Dharma, it is one of the beings or persons indicated here. Yeah? So it fulfills this qualification of being a person, being a being in this context. But then what this being is actually aiming at is existence, which is another word for samsara. Yeah, it is actually aiming at samsara, at existence within samsara. So that's the one thing. It is aiming at samsara, and it is also turning the back on other people's needs, other people's needs. Therefore, this person is inferior to a person of the middling scope or of the great scope.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Then come back down to Joy Chapa, Nibeni, Divi Chapa, Sumbeni, Gunon the Sambe Chapa, Shibeni, da Chapa Shita Bares, Taka, Kampasundua, Kampashidua, what did it? That and that get shit up. Konatilla Guyanamna. Gashi. Top Nikandaki is top the dingo, quit the Watsam, Jibu the Shigato. Tononia was not doing somebody Shigato. Give the Tamabre Slaudoa. What did it? Shibeni Chabaka shit dingidos. They are one to some Tondo Neves, one to Tamiki digit them Tondo Neves. One to Slitter, Tatami digit Tondo Neves. They top the Manola Shubas, top Manola Shubatos, top Nurgamidos. Didn't give only Chungi, Singing Hilas. How was on? Give a Chung singing Garisha Osana. One to some Tondo Neres. They top Manola Shubani didn't give a Chung singing. How was on?
So now I have to go a little bit back and forth between the English and the Tibetan, because now it says here by the first line, the difference of application is shown. And by the second, the difference in result. Is that true? know that those who by whatever means seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of psychic existence. So the result here is the pleasures of psychic existence, and the application is actually the whatever means. And the third line in the Tibetan is showing the special aspect of motivation or intention, and this is to seek for themselves no more than the pleasures of psychic existence. Yeah, so that's what the only thing they seek is that. So this is their motivation, and the fourth line in Tibetan would show the basis for this special features. So this is the person of the least capacity. Yeah, so that's just the things mentioned: the application, the result, and the motivation. Again, the application is whatever means. We talked about what these means actually are. Then the result is the pleasure of psychic existence, and the motivation is that they seek only that. And so somebody who has these kind of features, and that is then the basis for these features, such a person would here be expressed as a being of the small scope. And further on it says here, because of only aiming solely on a higher rebirth, and abiding in an unmistaken method for that. Yeah, so just interesting here is the unmistaken. So this person knows the right method and abides in that. Because of that, because it's aiming only merely on a higher rebirth and abides in a method practice for that. Therefore, these things are the characteristics of being of a small being indicated here.
chik chuku dagana re ma to je ni ya ma ya ni sende don de ni ya de chima don ni ya wa che ga ma res de shair shita.
And then it says here, in general, with regard to a small being or the least being, the lowest being, it says the small being. With regard to the small being, you can also state somebody that is aiming also merely at the aims of this life. But here in our context, we necessarily want to talk about somebody who's abiding in a non-erroneous, flawless, correct method with regard to higher rebirth. Yeah, so it's just making the same thing again. Like it says, like the lowest being can be this phrase can be used in different ways. And if you take everybody who is not a middle or great being, if you put everybody in that lowest being, then you would have also those who are not going beyond this life in the lowest being. But what we are talking about here in our context of the three beings of Lama Atisha, then we are talking here about the person, the small person, or the small capacity, as somebody who necessarily abides in the non-erroneous method for attaining higher rebirth. And therefore, we can, because of this attitude here, or the way things are done here, there's actually only one type of small being, and we do not have a division of small being into two different types.
Yeah, animal desha.
And then we stop here for today.
Chanjo Sanjo Rinpoche, Maje, Pana George, Keba, Yamba Meba, Kone Kondo Kao, only Tower Rinpoche, Maje, Pana George, Keba, Yamba Meba, Kone Kondo Kao.
May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. May the wisdom realizing emptiness that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. No?
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Venerable.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
You everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Many thanks.